Hi guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Val and welcome to day 6 of our 200 days of Psalms. Today's Psalm is actually Psalms chapter 6, where we see David making a prayer of faith when he was in a turmoil or just a season of distress. And so yeah, let's get into it. David first starts off the psalm by crying out to God that God would not punish him or rebuke him out of his anger because of the things that he had done. And we see that David was always acknowledging that he wasn't right standing with God, and he never walked in denial that he had shortcomings or he wasn't a perfect person. In verse 2, we see that he was pleading with God for mercy because he had two problems, and one of the problems that he had was that he was getting weak and his bones were being troubled. And the other problem that he had was that his soul was very troubled because of the distress and the confusion that he was going through. David knew that his deliverance would only come from God and not men. And if there's one thing that I have learned from Psalms 1 to even now, is that it keeps this thing that keeps repeating that the help of men is vain. And for David, he was aware that only God would deliver him from this turmoil that he was in, from these battles that he was constantly fighting with himself. And when he even talks about his weak and his soul, his body and his soul were in distress because he was going through so much, and he constantly knew that his deliverance in this case would only come from God. We also see that David never got so used to the mercies of God, because he would constantly repeat, God show me mercy, God have mercy on me. That means he wasn't too familiar with God, and sometimes we can always get familiar with God because we think we deserve it. And for David, he never thought that he deserved grace, he deserved mercy. He always acknowledged that God was the one who was showing him mercy. He always never took it for granted. We can never take God's grace and mercy for granted. And in verse 6, we see that David is mentioning to God that he's full of sorrow, and all night long he keeps crying because of what he's going through. And I think it was last week on Thursday I was actually sharing some of this same scripture, Psalm 6:6, where it talks about you keeping on crying because of going through hard time doesn't make it easy for you. It actually blurs your vision to a point where you see nothing bigger than your problem, and you're just focused on this distress that you are in. I don't think it's okay to cry all the time. I don't think it's okay to soak yourself to bed because you're crying. And I think David was mentioning it to God because it became overwhelming for him. It's not okay to cry, to soak yourself in tears. For him, he mentioned that he says that he was full of sorrow. What sorrow does for you, it blurs your vision. You stop seeing things as God sees them. You stop having a vision. It's not okay. It's not okay. You need to arise and leave things to God and just surrender. We see from verse 8 to 10 where David decides to arise and declare things in his life and prophesy to himself, where he talks about, depart from me, all you workers of iniquity. After he recognized that he was in sorrow, after he recognized that this sorrow that he kept crying all night wasn't helping him, it was making his vision unclear. He had to leave it to God by acknowledging that God was one who would deliver him from this sorrow. He decided to arise and prophesy to himself. I do believe it has to get to a point where, as much as we desire to be delivered from God, he cannot do it without us. We need to start speaking into our lives. We need to start speaking things that are not out of sight, things that are not what we see, things that are actually based on faith. You need to prophesy to yourself. You need to speak deliverance in your life yourself. You need to declare what you want to see in your life, which we learn from David. He declared that he was tired of these iniquity enemies that were holding him hostage from his deliverance. Just to conclude it, we see that David knew that weeping has a voice in the ears of God and God would hear him, but he knew that he can't keep weeping because he knows he's God. We also need to know that we cannot keep weeping like we don't know our God. We need to know that our God hears us and he sees us and he is ready to deliver us until we are willing to work with him. And when this weeping becomes too much, it now becomes oppression from the enemy, and now it just needs God's deliverance, and he's able to give it to us. And David has taught us to raise a prayer of faith to God when we are actually in a turmoil, in times of distress, in times of confusion. and God hears us, and he sees our weeping. And that's all I had for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you tomorrow, and bye.